Excuse me.
So good morning. Continue a little more on our ordinary living as we look at vows. I was doing a little background reading. Apparently, the Reformers challenged this idea of taking public vows because actually they looked like the church was saying they're only for a few people. And I think we talked about it earlier on. Do you remember the vows of poverty, chastity, obedience? Somehow that some were chosen to have a higher calling. And there is a part where we understand our own callings, and we have a special way to live out these aspects of the gospel. But they're not just for the few. Everyone's to integrate them some point into their own lives. This is the gospel message. And it's not something that's just for an elite few, of which you were part of an elite group. That's kind of how it was kind of presented at one time. I don't know how you remember hearing it. Did you think you were special? Well, maybe, but we do in some way have a set-asideness about it. So that does have that possibility of making us look a little bit unapproachable. I often think of that about Mary, the mother of Jesus too, humble handmaid of Nazareth. In iconography, for instance, how is she presented? The royal queen with more gold and more jewelry. It's sort of our human attempt to say she's special, but what happens in all this, if we become so special, we're unapproachable, I think. So there's a part where there's a humility about these virtues. Yes, we live them out as members of religious communities, or myself as a priest, a diocesan priest. Not to say, oh, look at me, but I'm trying to integrate the very values of the gospel, as are you, in your life, where you have a community that fosters this as well. So today we're going to be looking at ordinary obedience. So even the idea of obedience, if we're looking at, again, the world standards, I don't know, do we see that as a positive or a negative? Quite often we look at it as probably not necessary. I'm free to do what I want. That's sort of our message. So even though we're taught the fourth commandment, I quite often use that now to people. Remember to respect your elders. That's how I will interpret it. Obey your parents is how we learned it, right? There is a part where there is to be this appreciation of obedience as something good and not keeping us from freedom. So it doesn't sound like a virtue for adults. It sounds like it takes away our freedom. Follow or obey the law or end up in prison. A little fear in that, is there? Does that work? Maybe for a while. And then it doesn't work, huh? follow the law or pay the price. Or follow the law, it's a good idea. That had to do about the time when the speed limit was going to, I don't know, what was it at one time, it was going to 55 or something. The idea was, it's a good idea. And that's how some of the ads were presented on TV, if I remember right. And then there were also those, follow the law, or it'll get you. And then it's like, okay, I wonder what motivates us more? A good idea, or because you have to? I think true freedom says because I choose to, So that's kind of, I think, the understanding of what obedience is. It's going to be looking at that better idea behind it, not because we have to. The gentle, the ordinary, operating within a context of acceptance of oneself, and acceptance for a common good, which might mean we have to do something that we don't maybe want to do, but we see it as a good in some way beyond us. I always appreciate the Benedictines background in my own formation, especially at the St. John's in Collegeville. And I don't think they emphasize that by lots of teaching, but part of any religious community, your own probably included, would suggest somehow that obedience comes from the word, meaning to listen. It doesn't mean obedience means do what I tell you. That's not exactly what obedience means. It means listening. And then in some sense hearing this and then responding even together. And I think there again, the communities of faith, like your own religious communities would have, right? You have your chapter meetings or your gatherings of community, is to be hearing from one another. So you're not just going to say, I wonder what Mother General is going to tell me what to do. That's not exactly what we're understanding here. We're saying, how is the Spirit calling us and how are we responding? And so it has more to do with that listening and attentiveness. Even the word that we're hearing a little more about nowadays is like the synod idea, which is this idea of listening. Where in our time, I think we had a pastoral council in our own diocese, not so much present right now, but I think there's a little reliving of that now again, where there's going to be a little more of a gathering to hear the voices of the community or diocese even. Because this idea of listening is an important part to obeying. So it's not a blind obedience, but an informed obedience that actually allows even each one of us to be free. I'm going to use the example of kind of artists. Sometimes they say, well, they're the ones that don't need to follow the laws or whatever. And we get kind of a reputation. Of course, I don't think I'm a radical artist. We do know some are a little out there, maybe, huh? We kind of say, well, they're just artistic. It's giving a little bit of permission to break the laws or go beyond the measures. But artists are often described as people who live outside the law, or they make up their own laws. But I want to believe that this goes back to a class I had up at St. Paul, actually St. Catherine's up there, the college where I did a lot of my art classes. One of the sisters there had said, well, even artists obey. An art instructor taught only when one knows the medium you're using and know it well, are you going to be able to really express yourself in it. And it's kind of as simple as you really can't do a watercolor with oil paint. It's not going to work. And so you have to kind of know what's the medium, what is capable, and that will allow us to be free to then express ourselves. Iconographers, the true iconographers too, don't say, well, what am I going to think about here? They say, what has been handed on to us? And I will then express from that image. So it's like carrying this prototype, what was before, is handed on to us and to me. And so I interpret it, but I respect what was handed on to me. So there is that element, that's where it can sound like copying, which we kind of know is not so good, I guess. But there's a part of appreciating what's been handed on to us. So in some sense, the artist will know the tradition, and then maybe push the boundaries a little bit, you might say, but will also be somehow showing respect for the past, and especially in iconography is that kind of apparent. So sometimes, though, like I was saying, it does sound a bit like being the opposite of freedom when we think it needs to break all the rules. It isn't about breaking the rules, it's kind of respecting why we have them, is to guarantee something. We need to know the medium that we're using as artists so we can express themselves. I use the example too, in a potter, you can't mix clay with other things and then put it in a kiln and expect it to fire correctly. It will probably explode. So you got to try to be respectful in that sense. Only when I know a medium I'm using am I free to create. I need to obey the core of what that medium is. And I think we can apply it to ourselves. We need to know who are we if we're going to be the medium whereby we are responding to God's plan, God's will in our lives and follow Him, or even obey God. So it's not being forced against my will, but it's something that I accept, because coercion or oppression is not freedom, and it's not the gospel. It's not about conforming my will to what is really something opposite of me, but it's conforming my will to what and who I really am. That kind of makes sense. It's ultimately about Him being free. So, maybe reflecting on your own life, what are you? Who are you? What's your medium? What is at your core? Are you oil or are you watercolor? I don't know. Clay? What am I? What is God creating with in me? What are my own talents? Maybe some personal work or even personality work. Some of us have probably done that in our past, I believe. Not most of our growing up and probably in our ministries, in our lives. Kind of knowing something about ourselves, personality work might be a good way to learn obedience about who we are. Knowing better what I am, what I'm able to do best. I remember way early on, probably there was in the 70s, and I was already in the 80s, so somewhere around the same time frame. Some of you have probably been hearing about it too. The Myers-Briggs personality profile. We all kind of know it. You probably know your letters. INFJ. So it's like, oh, I got a code now. But we kind of know it helps us. Those things have helped me appreciate diversity, number one, too, of other people. I don't really calculate how many options are there. There's like 20 different maybe personality types in that. And then another group, and I think it was actually through the Notre Dame they did a workshop, and maybe some other religious communities were there too, on the Enneagram also. So then I'm thinking, that's the 5. I got myself figured out. So it doesn't identify me totally, but it certainly helps me understand more where I've acted, what's kind of my core, and kind of how I operate, and see myself then being true, even to listen to myself, like what works or what doesn't. In working with staffs, and some of you would have been at parishes, we do the Richmond days sometimes, and we'd have some kind of complex happening. So we might bring in a person, and they would do, I think that one was called, what did I write down here, where we did a disc instrument. You remember the disc one? But it was kind of thing, these are all things that are needed in an organization. Who has the gifts that are capable for this? It was kind of funny. We realized that in some areas we don't have anyone capable in that area. What do you do then? But the idea that this said, there's sometimes you have to operate. This is a good lesson about obedience, I think. There's a time sometimes where we have to operate where we're not maybe so comfortable. But we realize it. But we know we can do it too. But we're just not at home there as much, huh? And so that's kind of the aspect that I think I learned about myself there. So that we all, the perfect community would have all of that, huh? And maybe yours is the perfect community, I'm not sure. So that all gifts are able to be expressed. But sometimes we have to kind of move in uncomfortable places too. But we kind of know, kind of core deep down who and what we really are. What kicks us What makes us tick is what I say, and what makes us ticked off. We kind of know there's something in us like that. So I can understand all this, so the diversity that we are, and then not being so much like judgmental as appreciative of how these all work together. I think I shared some of you, and I still reflect on this quite often in our own teaching about from all of our diversities. In the preface used usually on masses of the Holy Spirit, it says, God, we are grateful to you how out of all of the diversities you bring unity. It would sound as though unity is hampered by all the diversities. But in faith, we say that the diversities actually bring us to unity. And that is a little bit of a faith leap to make that work for us. So it's not being superior to one another. There's another kind of understanding of ourselves, I guess, local to the Gallup people around here at home, I guess. The strength finder, you've kind of been a part of that perhaps too. I think there's probably 12 or 15 strengths that you can find about yourself. Then you realize I don't have all those either, but others do. So I'm probably more of a harmonizer, as I think of my number one was that kind of a thing. Trying to bring about, out of all this stuff, kind of harmony. There's influencers. I'm not a big influencer. I kind of was disappointed to hear that, but hey, so I don't raise lots of money. Maybe that's all right. So we all have different gifts and talents, and so that's kind of an element about obedience, obeying ourselves, but then also obeying this kind of a group we might be part of, or a community as well. Knowing the context of me and knowing me helps me to create and to live my life in fulfilling and even in surprising ways. So there's a little bit of that, I guess I would call it that obeying of ourselves. That almost goes back to the Shakespearean line, right? This to thyself, be true to yourself. Or how is that going? I said wrong. Which one I'm thinking of there. To thyself. To thine own self, be true. Thank you. That sounds a little bit selfish, or could be, but there's an authenticity about this. Otherwise, we're actually betraying how we're created. So why is it, do you suppose, that as we grow up, we try to test the rules? Probably we do this as a way of kind of saying, where am I in relationship to authority? Is it just to show that they're not important? I think we're just kind of testing, are they important? So we kind of do challenge things. This testing actually probably helps us to know what is good for us and what isn't good for us. And we can learn, probably this is, I think, a line that we've all experienced in our own lives. We can learn from our disobedience. We find out, I went this way, and it wasn't a good choice. So in some sense, not that we give ourselves permission, but there is a part about acceptance that we may not always be right. Our own civil laws in our church, our canon laws, maybe our own community statutes. Do you call them laws or statutes? They're laws. We give them another name. No, but they're guides for us, aren't they? What are they trying to do? They're helping us to live freely. What God desires for us to be, what God desires of our community to be. They're not there to hammer us into something that we're not. Called to reflect God's love and His mercy and His compassion in the world where we are placed. So these become kind of our important parts. It is, I think, Psalm 119, and it goes on and on about the law of the Lord is perfect. The law of the Lord, oh dear. But if we read it correctly, I think there is something about that we have this, I think we were doing the little egg thing, we have this parameter about a structure that we are given by God. And we find our freedom in seeing ourselves in it. A spirituality of Nazareth would have me be obedient to Jesus, or as Jesus was, that spirituality of Nazareth would have me be obedient as Jesus was to his parents, not as though they were controlling him. I mean, he was the Son of God. of this where he could respect him. It's kind of interesting that Luke would say he was obedient to them. Oh, isn't that nice? He just did it, he didn't have to. There's a part where he needed to kind of know his own, perhaps, identity there. Being the boss and laying down the rules is one way of seeing one in authority. Maybe you're that person. I don't know. We all have strengths. But when we lay down the rules, this is it. Follow them. And we've got leaders like that probably. I won't mention any that I know of. But that's kind of a spirituality. I'll give it credit saying it's a spirituality. It says of Jerusalem, I know where we're going and we're going there. Are you with me or not? That's kind of a domination notion. Or Rome or the USA or whatever country, then we're going to do it with power because we're all united. A spirituality of Nazareth is seeing myself as being a beloved child and following and adopting and adapting to the rules for the good of others. What do you think would work best in this situation? That's a way also of following and obeying, but it's not as efficient, probably. You want to get something done? Let's have a meeting and talk about what should be done. Some people get, that's all we need is another meeting. I said it, you probably said it. When are we going to get doing something? And that's where you might need a leader who's stronger to say, okay, enough. We've done some of this process, but then in the end, we need to go out and do something. So it isn't to be ineffective, but I think the spirituality of Nazareth in our obedience says let's do a little more listening and hear the voices. And I think most of your religious communities have that kind of built into their own way that voices are heard. I'm going to just use a little example here. This is, I don't know if it's really obedience or not, but okay. After I retired, I think it's because of Pope Francis, he kind of inspired me. Inspired a lot of people. But I was surprised here. I was going to the prisons on Holy Thursday. You don't have to go to prison to wash the feet of the inmates. But it kind of intrigues me, so I thought, well, what's in the prison? And that reminded me of a lady up in O'Neill who would go to the prison. She has some health issues, and she had to climb up 2 or 3 stories to get up to that prison. And it says, Bobby, why do you, God love you, but do you really need to do that? But she felt called to do this. And she said, well, I just find it kind of reassuring. St. Paul was in prison a lot of his life, and I think he needed some visitors. So it just kind of gives a perspective about even there is a place for me to go. So I've made efforts on. The interesting part about prisons is there's a lot to get into them, even to get clearance and all that. But I should just break the law. It might be easier to get in there. That's a little bit weird thinking, but it's kind of a process, you go through all this and do this and can't do that. So just recently, I think it was just the other week, I went down to do the Mass at the Correction Center, so just under the airport. But I went in, like I normally have been doing about a year, I've been doing once a month, so it's not even a big commitment. And I go down there, and the guy said, what's this? You can't bring this in here. And it was the regular, normal amount of wine I brought in for Mass. And I said, well, no, we did a regular drinking now, but that's not all it's in there. Well, the bottle, it should have been brought into, it was a plastic bottle, so you brought in plastic, but non-marked. Well, this one had markings about wine bottle, and you've got those little individual wines. I thought, well, I had a clear one, but the problem with it was it was leaking. So I thought, well, I'll just leave it in this bottle and just have that little bit on the bottom. Sir, you can't bring alcohol into this facility. I could. I was given permission to. Who's in authority there? This younger gentleman was in authority. Did I find that easy to hear? No. Was I angry? Yes. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to give it up. So you get into this kind of, I get into passive aggressiveness. So I didn't say much. I was trying to be a little bit contorted. Like, are you sure I can't get out of this before? Well, I'll talk to my supervisor. Now who's got the authority? The supervisor. Well, he'll be on my side. He wasn't. Oh man, this stupid law. This stupid by trying to help these people. Well, then the bad part was they let me begin the Mass. I thought, this is just going to be fine. We got to the prayers of the faithful, getting ready for the Eucharist, the liturgy of the Eucharist. The supervisor said, I didn't talk to you. He took me from the altar and where I was having the Mass. You can't continue, just bring out here. I thought, no, you're kidding. And he said, yo, you broke the law. And so, and I wanted to just say, no. And then all of a sudden, the inmates were saying, he's here to help us pray, and he's not going to give us the wine. And then the other officers start talking to them, and it becomes almost divisive. This isn't good. So I was able to go out of there and get through a deacon who kind of organizes all this, was able to talk down. I said, no, friend, I'm not going to do this ever again. To say, no, it was a mistake that's been made. And it did bring about a healing, in a sense, because I talked to the supervisor on Monday. She was very apologetic that what had happened. But I still probably need to encounter something with this young gentleman. I don't know if I'll see him again or not, but certainly he's lifted up prayer in my life, as well as his supervisor, because they're not in an easy place. And the inmates aren't in an easy place. And I could have maybe gotten a little more sensitive about, I just didn't think I was going to push that button, but I had to obey it. And it was just kind of an odd situation of being kind of caught into a system that ended up being, I guess a learning thing in the end, but kind of tough. So I don't know, in that, I saw this idea of obedience. Sometimes it's just difficult to obey when it's going to affect us, even some of our own emotions. Like, man, this is the best thing here. But can it move me to maybe the prayer or the care for the communities? I think early on when I started that prison ministry, I realized being in there having Mass with the inmates was positive. They were helping us with reading some of the music. And I'm sure, the notice was the best they probably wanted to get out, so it helps them to be doing and participating, but that's good. But what I always was concerned with almost from the beginning was how when I go in, those who work there, it struck me they don't want to be here. And so I thought, that's not an easy place to be for them either. So there's some compassion kind of goes with that part of it, to see how can they be supported. So I'm kind of working through that process there. And of course, when you're working with a penitentiary, there are laws. And we're often just saying they broke the law, the inmates. But yeah, we want to work together to bring about something good and a better society, all of it. So anyway, that's kind of my little example here. I got to thinking though, this obedience, and that was minor. Some of you will remember Father Jack in our diocese. He would go to jail because he'd say what you're doing here is the wrong thing or whatever. And he put his life on the line that way to be actually in prison. And he's not alone. I mean, there are also women religious who were with him at times too, who would put themselves down there. And again, they had the freedom, this is another thing probably about religious communities, to maybe be a little older. They didn't have to worry as much maybe about their particular friend or family or something if they were married or had children. But some even there with their life on the line. But they knew who they were in a way too, to say, I need to speak against this, or to speak a word of truth, to power. Obedience is some of that too, because I'm listening, are you listening? And kind of keeping a dialogue. So all I would say is that minor incident of not obeying the law or policy of prison wasn't a big event, but it kind of stirred something in me to say, what am I to do here? And I think if anything, it's reconvinced me more to kind of stay with it. Looking at obedience now today, yesterday I forgot to talk about Mary and then about Brother Charles as kind of examples. So I just spent a little bit of time here with obedience, but these are new thoughts to you, I'm sure. The best line we always have of Mary is at the Annunciation. What does she say? I'd like to do it my way. No. Your will be done. And I'm the handmaid of you, Lord. That's a kind of turn over. I know who I am. I don't know why I'm here or why you're calling, but I'm going to be trusting you're going to lead there, Annunciation, I think is kind of a neat way to be reflecting on where obedience isn't an easy call, but it's kind of an authentic call. It says here kind of obedience in daily life and in service. It was extended beyond a pivotal moment, like I was kind of saying, Annunciation was kind of a high point in no doubt in Mary's life, but then how do you live that out 9 months? You know, as she was waiting to give birth even. And then even after Jesus' birth, how do you keep living out the Annunciation? And it isn't always good news from the days, no? How do you keep that focus? But she immediately went to visit her cousin Elizabeth, so she stayed connected in her own life with others. There's another woman who is bearing a child. So there's something about sharing of that whole mystery keeps it alive in her too, and maybe more authentic. Because Elizabeth recognized, Mary, guess what? I know you are an important person. Blessed are you among women. I'm sure that affirmed Mary to understand. I don't know what I'm doing exactly, but to hear from another that she would be affirmed. And then expressing her devotion through that great prayer of the Magnificat, which is a central prayer of the church. Unfortunately, I don't think many people quite catch it as a great prayer of praise spoken by Mary that's to be on our lips regularly. Of course, in our church, in the office, so that we are kind of privileged to pray, it's kind of been built into our own repertoire, prayer of the Magnificat. But when I even use the word to people, they don't know that one. I know the Hail Mary, and that's good, but I just think minimal. I'm not making a judgment, probably. The Magnificat is a great prayer that we can offer in some sense, and that prayer speaks of obedience. God, what you've done is marvelous. Let me be connected into that. Her actions demonstrate obedience involves not only accepting God's will, but also actively serving others and glorifying God, even in our daily life. Obedience also, as we think about Mary, is in trials and in sacrifice. If you're watching, I think I mentioned to you, I watched some of these series, The Chosen. I think the last part of this season, before we get to the one that's going to start in the fall, we'll see the crucifixion part of it. Jesus makes a special care for the women to say, you know, things are going to be getting bad here coming up. I want you not to come into Jerusalem. Well, what did Mary find as important? That she would still stay with her son. So he will be at the cross. She will be at the cross. So even in trials and sacrifice, even when he would say, I don't want you to carry that burden so deeply, she will find herself there at the foot of the cross. It's probably the hardest place for her to be, and yet obedience would say, I'm going to trust that I need to be present. And then in some way, they said different theologians have talked about, and I think we've heard the image quite often, that Mary ends up becoming the new Eve, not disobeying God's plan, but connected to God's plan. That she's the new Eve, and that's not an insignificant thing to think about. How do we become a new Eve ourselves, listening, be attentive to the Lord? Anyway, those are some, there's probably more to be reflected on, but I might just have you think about that today, guys, in your prayer time. So, Mary, help me or understand, or how do I see obedience in your own life? And just a little reference, and then I'm running out of time here, I don't want to go forever either. But Charles D. Hall, this would be a guy who, with obedience, also went for this idea of, he was in the military, that would have been pretty illegal. They said, you know what, this isn't working, and they basically threw him out. He couldn't be obedient to the rules of the law. He had mistrust and everything. He wasn't supposed to, all of this kind of thing, the military. So he's doing his own obedience to himself in a negative way that was destroying him. But then he became converted, or by his conversion, he became very respectful of his spiritual director, Father Quilvin, and then also his own communities where he found himself. So much so that he would even say to the Trappists, and he would challenge probably his own life. He said, listen, I'm not able to be myself here exactly either. They listened to him. It wasn't a negative part, but out of this attentiveness to him and his own calling, he found himself being there and kind of moving on to his own way of expressing obedience to the will of the Father. the prayer that is kind of on our lips as priests of Jesus Caritas is always the prayer of abandonment. You might have seen it, or maybe you've got it in some of your resources of prayer. I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will. Whatever you do, I thank you. So that kind of letting go is submitting to obedience, but not in a controlling way that's going to be destructive. He knows it, that it's going to bring about more fulfillment. So I think that's just what I'm going to end with here. That this obedience, which is a vow, isn't just for one person but it is in our religious communities or my life as a priest. There's really a call for all of us. How are we being attuned to the will of God in our lives? That's what's going to bring us to freedom. So I'll let that be my conclusion here, and then again there's some prayer sheet I think for you today as you leave. And then just a little thing about this afternoon. I don't know if you need to say everything probably, but we're going to have an opportunity for reconciliation this afternoon if you'd like to share in that individually. But we're going to start with a little bit of a communal part around 2 o'clock with a little bit of scriptures to kind of get us into a meditative part of this. Then there'll be an opportunity after the first part of that to go to reconciliation. I'll be set up kind of over in the room behind the fireplace area for individual reconciliation. And I'd like to come back as kind of conclusion, which is how I often see the way reconciliation can be celebrated as a whole community celebrate, giving praise to God for the gift of His forgiveness for us. So we'd like to conclude. And guess what we will be singing at that time? The great prayer of praise, the magnificat.